Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at BTB World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to what is going on between Pakistan and Iran. And in light of the rising tensions between the two countries, the National Security Committee meeting was also held, followed by a federal cabinet meeting. And this is important, especially with reference to the developments that have taken place earlier this week. But both the countries have decided towards de-escalation and increasing cooperation, particularly in terms of counterterrorism activities. This, of course, is something that Pakistan had earlier also reiterated and emphasized on, stating the fact that it adheres to the principles of the UN Charter, and it also believes that there is a lot of opportunity of dialogue and cooperation between the two countries, and emphasize the brotherly relationship that exists between Iran and Pakistan, and that needs to be emphasized even further in terms of the kind of cooperation efforts that are required by the Iranian side towards counterterrorism activities. So this is a positive development with regards to de-escalation between both the countries, but what remains to be seen, however, of course, is how things unfold on ground and what sort of cooperation opportunities exist, particularly in terms of tangible actions by both the countries, specifically with Iran also making sure that its territory is not being used against Pakistan or any other country, and also not providing safe havens or terrorist hideouts to any organization within Iran, and also effectively working on the kind of intelligence that is shared previously also by Pakistan, and that is going to be done in the future as well. So this is going to be our discussion in terms of the way forward and what sort of evolving relationship can possibly be expected to be seen in the coming days and months, and whether or not any sort of actionable reassurances are required by Iran to making sure that similar incidents are not occurring in the future. This is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to be taking a look at the international arena, where, of course, since October 7th, a lot of violence is being carried out by Israel in terms of the genocide that is currently ongoing against the Palestinian people in Gaza. And this is something that has been highlighted and it has been shared by the international community on various platforms, with protests happening all over the world. At the same time, we also know that the International Court of Justice has also been moved by South Africa against the genocide by Israel. And this is something, of course, that the international community across the world has also supported. At the same time, we also have responses by other countries that seem to back Israel even now. But we do see a changing dynamic with the United States and Israel, with the US stating that there is no short-term or long-term solution to what is going on in Gaza without the creation of a Palestinian statehood. And this is important, and of course, this is something that has been unacceptable to Israel and still is, with Netanyahu also claiming that this is not on the table. And this seems to bring the two sides at odds with each other. How exactly is this going to pan out with reference to the kind of evolving dynamics in Gaza? And then, of course, with the way that the International Court of Justice has been moved, and how countries like Mexico and Chile have also sent a referral to the ICC in terms of what is going on and the kind of war crimes that Israel has committed. So it remains to be seen whether or not the U.S. is going to be taking a substantial shift in the kind of support it has provided to Israel previously, and whether or not this can positively impact the creation of a Palestinian statehood. Guarantees have also been given by the U.S. with regards to support by the Arab world and Muslim countries in rebuilding Gaza, conditional, of course, on the fact that a Palestinian state is established in the future. So we're going to be exploring these options in our second segment, and talking about what can be seen in the coming days and months. For this and more, of course, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh, Pitafi and Faisal, and we've also been joined online by our guest, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, foreign affairs expert, and we'll be joined by Jauhar Saleem, former foreign secretary, in the show. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I'll start with you, giving what has been going on between Pakistan and Iran. Of course, this has been something that has been discussed throughout this week, particularly in terms of the kind of unreasonable actions that Iran has committed, not just against Pakistan, but also Iraq and Syria. And this is something surprising in terms of the kind of historic dynamics that existed between Pakistan and Iran. At the same time, after Pakistan's response, now things are moving towards de-escalation, and there is a conversation at the highest levels with regards to cooperation on counterterrorism activities. I want your perspective, and how do you see that unfolding on ground in terms of actual actions taken by Iran, given the fact that we've had intelligence sharing done previously as well, but not real action seen? Do you think that that's going to change now?
Well, Iran's aggressive action actually came out of the blue. at a time when the Iranian foreign minister was meeting our caretaker prime minister in Davos. And then suddenly we see this highly irresponsible and irrational act on behalf of Iran. Crossing Pakistan's borders and undertaking, drone attacks on whatever targets they claimed. But that is not how interstate relationships work. And I think what Pakistan has done by responding to this hostile action and abandoning its years-long restraint and targeting, the hideouts of the terrorists and the separatists inside Iran's Sistan-Balochistan province, I think it was an appropriate response. So given that, I think we should welcome this good news that obviously there are multiple channels of communication between the two countries, including at the highest level, and eventually sanity has prevailed. And, the Chinese offer to mediate and the UN Secretary General's call for restraint, I think eventually worked. And it is extremely important that given the fact that Pakistan and Iran are close neighbors throughout history, although we have had some differences, but most of the time we have deeply cooperated with each other. And there is this, deep bond of brotherhood that exists between the people of Pakistan and the people of Iran. And I think given the sanctity of that bond, it is important that we mend our relations as quickly as possible and overcome the bitterness that has been caused by Iran's irresponsible and irrational behavior.
Right, and Dr. Ishtiaq, it's important, of course, that this was taken up and discussed at the highest level in Pakistan. Of course, we had the National Security Committee meeting as well, and the federal cabinet also sat together. But I want to understand, in terms of the kind of resolve that Pakistan has always reiterated in its principles of foreign policy and of course, in terms of its own national security. I want to understand then that whether or not you think that this is reciprocated at the highest level by Iran as well, while we talk about the historic relations that both the countries have. From this point onwards, can we expect a more renewed sort of resolve from the Iranian side as well?
Well, Sana, it will all depend upon how the Iranians act in the future. Because if a country's regime has acted irresponsibly and without any reason and without giving any notification of any activity across its frontiers, if it had given any indication that of its concerns, then obviously we could have our security establishment as well as civilian leadership could have responded and tried to address it amicably, just as we do in our own relationships with Afghanistan and with Iran and, beyond that as well. That is how the diplomatic norms are all about. But if the Iranian regime has acted irresponsibility, we have to be very cautious in the future as well. Remember that until 1979, when Raza Shah Pahlavi was the king of Iran, and we had two wars with India in 1965 and then in 1971. During both occasions, the Iranians actually refueled our planes which were engaging in combat with the Indian Air Force. There has been love and affection between the people of Iran and Pakistan, as I said before. But something drastically changed in 1979. Since then, Iran has been behaving very irresponsibly in the Middle East, across the Gulf. And since 2003, actually, it has taken very offensive actions through its proxies across the Middle East. And this is the first time that Iran has, engaged in this very offensive act against Pakistan, although it has been a very normal norm of Iranian regime across the Middle East, in Lebanon through Hezbollah, in Iraq through an Iraqi sectarian militia, in Yemen through the Houthis, in Gaza through Islamic Jihad and Hamas, And these actions have produced devastating consequences for those people and for the governments of the region.
Right. Let us also welcome in the debate Jauhar Saleem Saab, former Foreign Secretary, who's joined us online. Thank you very much, Saleem Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I'll start with your perspective in terms of what has happened first before we talk about the current scenario. Because while we talk about the way that Iran has acted, there is always this concern of how this is coming from a country that Pakistan has historically enjoyed great brotherly ties with. A lot of the comments that we have seen coming from various sides point towards how this is a very foolish move by Iran, not just in terms of Pakistan, but also Iraq and Syria. And I want your understanding in terms of what can possibly be the rationale that Iran decided to act in this way. Is it just a miscalculation, or do you think that there's something more to it?
Thank you. I think in terms of rationale, we have to see the context, which is that after what has been happening internationally, there are many Western analysts who have been saying that Iran in recent days has been a little frustrated. And some of the actions that they have taken, for instance, they have conducted some strikes in Syria, then in Iraq, and now in the southern region of Pakistan. So even for the Western analysts, it's been a little difficult to understand how come they are taking these type of actions, which in the past they had been very cautious about. So that is the context. In terms of Pakistan-Iran relations, it is a very important relationship. We've had brotherly ties for decades and decades. Even between the brothers, sometimes there could be misunderstanding. But such an irresponsible action was not expected of Iran. And once it happened, of course, Pakistan had to have a befitting reply, which Pakistan did. But the important thing now is this is diplomacy, and in diplomacy, whenever friends or brothers have a misunderstanding, then you try to de-escalate the situation, and you try to through dialogue, through communication, through contact, you try to find a way out, and that is exactly what is happening now. We have seen some very positive statements from both sides, from the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Abbas Gilani. Then I've seen other statements from our former ambassador, Imad Qureshi, for instance. I saw a Twitter statement. Then from the Iranian side as well, their Foreign Minister. And so I think, and the two Foreign Ministers have talked to each other. So these are all very positive signs. I think it's very important that the two countries, in keeping with the excellent relations that they have enjoyed for so many decades, long-standing relations that they have, and they are not just two brotherly countries, they're two neighbors as well. And that is why it's so important, this de-escalation and finding a peaceful solution to whatever, from both sides, whatever issues both sides might feel. And from Pakistan's side, it's very clear, because, Pakistan's stance, and in fact, what the Iranians have said, the Pakistani strikes, as per the Iranian side, have resulted in casualties there, but they've said that the casualties were of foreign nationals.
Yeah.
So I think that is, in a way, very supportive of Pakistan has been saying. Having stated that, I think the important thing here is not to sort of, to go into a blame game of any sort, but rather through restraint and through dialogue, through diplomacy. And that is what diplomacy is all about. It's about finding ways. Diplomacy is the art of possible. It's the art of mending fences where needed, and it's the art of enhancing understanding where there is need. There's a need for that. So I don't really see this situation aggravating. Inshallah, I think the sanity has prevailed and will prevail on the Iranian side. And from Pakistan side, of course, we have been very clear on our position. And the two countries, hopefully, inshallah, could go back to the, to the brotherly understanding that we've always had.
Absolutely. And Saleem Sahab, I want to understand further with reference to where the relationship's heading now. Of course, we've seen that there is an agreement on de-escalation and more cooperation. But in terms of the counterterrorism activities between both the countries and the support that is required, particularly from Iran, in terms of the kind of terrorist hideouts that exist there, which Pakistan has identified previously as well, what sort of actions can be expected then now? What does Pakistan expect in terms of what Iran needs to do on this front to making sure that there is, in fact, more cooperation on ground?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think it's very important because Pakistan has some genuine security concerns, which are basically emanating from certain non-state terrorist groups, which are working, for instance, in Afghanistan. And if that is happening across the border with Iran, then it becomes very important that Iran ensures that none of those non-state actors are able to use their soil for instigating terrorist acts against Pakistan. Because, that is not just international law, but also very much a requirement of a healthy and happy relationship between two friendly countries, and in this case, two brotherly countries in terms of common faith. So I think this is a very legitimate expectation that Pakistan has, that Iran will ensure that their soil will not be used for fomenting terrorism in Pakistan. And I think that this message has been sent loud and clear to Pakistan's actions. And hopefully, Iran will, in future, be more mindful of that.
Right, absolutely. And that, of course, is the hope given the current scenario. And Faisal, when we look at the situation, of course, Pakistan has been dealing with increased terrorist activity on various fronts for quite some time now. And it's important that we develop this relationship with our neighbors in terms of what needs to be done and how to ensure, as Ambassador Saab was saying with reference to non-state actors, that our own national security is preserved. Is there more that also needs to be done in terms of intelligence sharing and coordination at home and with the right agencies in the region as well with regards to what is going on in Pakistan, and what sort of actions then can be expected in terms of our own decisions?
Oh yes, why not? Of course, we have to increase our, intelligence sharing with a country like a brotherly country like Iran. Why as a brotherly country? This incident, before this incident, of course, we know that we have long-standing relation with Iran. And earlier, I was listening to Dr. Ishtiaq, and he has rightly pointed out that, of course, the relationship is deep-rooted with Iran. And one more thing I want to highlight here, even our languages, Persian and Urdu, they are considered as twins. So this is the level of our relationship, both of the countries. So that relationship should always be given importance. Obviously, Iranians, they did something which they shouldn't have done at during this week. And now whatever Pakistan did was an appropriate reaction to something which was initiated by Iran. And by the way, Sana, you have asked about the question that, of course, the intelligence is always there. Let me hail here the intelligence services of Pakistan. they have always been 100% when it comes to, pointing out where the terror is being originated. The evidence is in front of all of us. Why I say this? Because in this, counter-attack, obviously, the reciprocation is an evidence. Evidence coming from where? Of course, the Iranian authorities, they accept themselves that all of the, all of the people who got hit in this action, they were the foreigners. Of course, they were talking about BLA and BLF. So this means that our intelligence services, they already kept a record of all of them, where they were and where they were hiding. But of course, they have been sharing all of these, intelligence with their counterparts sitting in Iran. But of course, nothing was taking place, and now they took things in their own hands, and they have done what Iran should have been doing in past. Because when we highlight these, these people sitting there, of course, we mean that these are the very people who are creating hindrances for security in Pakistan. And I think it was an excellent service done by intelligence services and our armed forces to Pakistan, that when we saw that Iran actually challenged our sovereignty and challenged our territorial integrity, of course, a befitting reply was due, and it was given, and it was given with full force. And I think that's how it should be. Now I'm very happy that both of the states, I mean, the third country shouldn't be coming in between for mediation. I mean, both of the countries, they have a long-standing relationship, and they should sit down and sort out their matters. And they should agree to each other that they will never be allowing their land, especially, when we talk about Iran, we should not be forgetting that Kulbhushan Jadhav was actually always entering into Pakistan from Iran's side. And in the guise of Chabahar, whatever India is doing, sitting in Iran, utilizing that border against Pakistan, even our intelligence agencies, they are aware of it. And 17 times he had visited on a passport under the name of Kulbhushan Jadhav, I'm talking about, under the name of Mubarak Hussain Patel. How is it possible? I very well know that Iranians, they have an excellent intelligence service. How is it possible? I disagree if somebody says that they didn't know that he has been, carrying out all of these activities. How is it possible that they were unaware of it? No, they were aware of it, but still they let that happen. I think somewhere down the line, somebody really needs to think about these things as well on these lines and sit with the Iranians and sort out all of these problems. And I think Iranians should be rational enough in this context.
Right. And Farrukh, I want to explore this further, and I want your perspective also in terms of whether or not you agree how intentional this has been from the Iranian side, given the kind of network that has existed emanating from India as well, and what can be done then, especially when we ask for increased cooperation with regards to this factor coming in from India, whether or not we can see that Iran will be actively engaging in terms of intelligence sharing that links it back to India.
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. Allow me to actually go back to what Ishtiaq Sahab was saying and what you were asking regarding trust between the two countries. It takes decades to build trust between two nations. It takes only one strike, one miscalculation to totally jettison whatever was there. So after what has happened, I'm glad that my country does not want escalation and it wants actually cooperation. But frankly, as an advocate of Iran-Pakistan friendship, my trust is gone. So I'm going to wait and see what exactly becomes of it. But coming back to what you were saying or what you were asking, let me ask you, is it possible that a country like Iran has ungoverned spaces? I will, understand that that country doesn't have that kind of control over its own soil. If someday Hezbollah, Houthis, or similar kind of groups actually come out and start condemning any particular policy of Iran. So a country that has that kind of reach, it actually is now influencing all over the Arab countries, right? That country doesn't have control over its territory. I can't understand. Look, Pakistan and Iran, both these countries have a fundamental difference. Pakistan, as a stated principle, does not and will not want to support any non-state actor internationally, right? It might have been the case in the past, but those people who were talking about Afghan Taliban being Pakistan's proxy, now they have to explain what went wrong and why is it that Pakistan and Afghan Taliban are at loggerheads. So Pakistan doesn't have in principle any proxies anymore anywhere as a instrument of policy. But that isn't the case with the other countries, right? Remember that when Syrian war was going on, at that time Zainabiyun, that brigade that was created out of Pakistani, one sect's population in Quram. They were people who were actually recruited and sent from Iran. Many of them were killed and their graves are in Iran. So this disregard for international border has gone on for very long. I don't care what they do with other countries, but when it comes to Pakistan's border, I think they'll have to. And by the way, there's a history also. If you remember the Jauhar Gawada competition, at that time Hamid Karzai was Afghanistan's president. At that time, India actually built a road between Kabul and Jauhar. The purpose was only one, to bypass potential of Gawada. Even though there is no comparison, because Gawada is actually really a deep sea port and it has far more berths in comparison to Jauhar. But this went on. And then Iran and Pakistan once upon a time used to be, used to cooperate a lot, but then we have seen what has happened. First, because of invasion of Iraq, they got a footprint in Iraq as well. And after that we saw, because of Arab Spring, perhaps they started inhaling their own propaganda a lot. And this is the problem with the idea of imperial overreach. Whenever you are expanding yourself too much, your hardliners, and I'm not talking about clerics, by the way, I'm talking about, the soldiers, people, especially their guards, they start thinking that they can actually fight with everyone. And this is a fundamental miscalculation. You cannot keep on offending everybody and then hope that someday you are not going to be cornered, right? So I'm again very, very happy that Pakistan in principle has agreed to the idea of de-escalation and working with Iran. But with due respect, if you are talking about intelligence cooperation, that boat has sailed. Now what I'm looking at is fencing of the border and zero incursion from Iran's side.
Right. So with regards to fencing on the border, just yesterday we also talked about incursions from the air as well. How will that be ensured?
Yeah, when that happens, that is actually international violations, right? Borders violation. That we can take care of because we have proven it already. The only
but in terms of prevention?
Sorry?
In terms of prevention?
I mean, if that country wants to fight a war with this country, that is their choice, but I don't think that will happen. This was one-off, I think, and then Pakistan gave them a response that must be enough for deterrence.
All right. We're now going to be talking about our next segment with reference to what is going on in Gaza and the kind of developments that we have seen taking place since October 7th. Unfortunately, the genocide continues till this date, and there have been numerous deaths, precious deaths, including those of children that have been lost. And it is unfortunate and extremely tragic what is going on in the country in terms of the kind of loss of lives and the suffering of the people of Palestine. While there are numerous calls for a ceasefire and while there is also proceedings going on in international courts of justice, there is of course a lot of importance in terms of how countries which have the kind of clout, including the U.S., what stances they provide. And Ambassador Saab, I'll start with you in terms of what the U.S. has recently said in terms of there being no short or long-term solution without Palestinian statehood. Do you think that this is a very significant statement coming from the U.S., given their previous support to Israel, a support that perhaps also continues in a lot of ways to this day, and the way that we haven't really seen calls of a ceasefire and an end to the genocide?
Yeah, I think what I had said in my previous comments on this particular issue in some of the programs was that in the beginning, nobody was talking about that. You see, it was just the Chinese, who talked about the two-state solution. And I'm talking about October 7 incident. And after that, what happened? So, but gradually, as we've seen the death toll rising there, and we saw all the human rights violations and the grave repression and virtually a massacre that we saw there. I think following that, the international public opinion has undergone quite a change. And what we see now is more rational voices emerging from everywhere. In the U.S., we saw the Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense first, and then, of course, the Secretary of State himself, Blinken. He made some statements, and now we see more and more statements from the U.S. talking about the revival of peace process and the two-state solution, like at least negotiations towards that eventual objective. So I think, and I had felt it at the time that this could emerge from what we are seeing in Gaza now, because eventually the realization would be there that this matter is too deep-rooted to just sort of, it requires a more profound action in terms of resolution. Of course, the Americans have not been supporting ceasefire, and I think they would probably not support it still, because they did not want the Israelis to be handicapped in terms of what they were doing there, or even constrained in terms of what they were doing there by a ceasefire. So that policy will probably continue. But on the other hand, I think the back-channel diplomacy that is taking place and the shuttle diplomacy that we see, for example, Blinken has paid 5 visits to the region. And in his last visit, he visited 9 different countries and held high-level, top-level parleys everywhere. So I think that will intensify. And if we could see a silver lining in the cloud, it could be that eventually there could be some revival of that process. Because, and without that, quite frankly, there could be recurrence of such conflict within, like whether it's Gaza or West Bank, unless there's a long-term resolution.
Yeah.
We could see every few years, unfortunately, very unfortunately, a recurrence of such episodes, such tragic episodes. And that is why it's so important. With the American role, because of the influence that Israel has in America and vice versa, the influence that America has in Israel because of the huge assistance it provides to Israel. In fact, in many ways, Israel's survival has depended on American support, at least in the past decades. So I think America could play an important role, but so is the case with some other countries, some leading EU members, the countries in the region like Saudi Arabia, UAE. They all have their diplomatic influence. They all have their, they all have their the ability to play a positive role, and the diplomacy that is happening in the region, particularly diplomacy that is not very visible. I think all of them are trying to play a role whereby there could be a revival of a peace process. Now, at what stage that happens, that remains to be seen. But the very fact that more and more voices are emerging in the support of that, which was not the case, by the way, in the first few weeks after October 7th. So I think that is at least a positive sign in a very, very difficult and challenging situation.
Absolutely. Ishtiaq Sahab, this of course, as Ambassador Saab was talking about in terms of future occurrence, this of course isn't something that has started today or since October 7th. The suffering, of course, has continued for many years in the past as well. And so when we take a more comprehensive look at this issue right now, there is great encouragement in the way that there is international support to the cause at the moment. But I want to understand whether or not any of that will be achievable without active support from countries like the US, and whether this statement actually opens doors for that. And also add to that what it's pointing towards in terms of the involvement with regards to the Muslim countries in terms of rebuilding Gaza, conditional that there is a guarantee of a Palestinian statehood in the future. Do you think that that's something that can actually be worked on in terms of the kind of support that is required from the Arab world?
Well, Sana, it is absolutely clear, the kind of support that America and some European countries, especially Germany, have given to Israel amid this genocide. I think it's amazing. It brings to the fore the reality that, no matter how much violation of human rights take place, if 30,000 people are killed in 100 days, including 10,000 children and 6,000 women, and then you have Europe, which claims human rights to be the champion of human rights, America to be the leading democratic country in the world, and look at their behavior. So one thing is very clear, that Israel is an oppressive state. It commits genocidal violence against Palestinians whose place, it has occupied for a long, long time. And then you have America and European countries and its allies in the West, giving a free hand to the state of Israel. Obviously, over time, after 3 months, there are complications in this support structure that Israel has, because the American leadership, whether they are Democrats or Republican, obviously are having their eyes upon the next elections. And they will also calculate as to which extent they should go to in support of the Netanyahu regime, which has its own domestic political complications, the charges of corruption, plus these, more than 100 hostages still in the hands of Hamas, and these guys coming out in Tel Aviv in protest every other evening. So these are issues. But one thing is clear, as Ambassador Saab said, that without political resolution of the Palestinian question, which means that the creation of a Palestinian state, a viable state that should live side by side with the state of Israel. And that also means that we operate in a system of international, the international structure is based upon nation states, and there is no scope for any non-state actor in this world, if we believe in international law. So therefore, I think we also need to look at as to which non-state actors actually instigated this violence and which state was behind this instigation. Because just focusing upon ramification or symptoms of the issue that began on October 7, and from the Palestinian perspective, forgetting pre-October 7, almost a century-long period of occupation and repression, and from their perspective, again, what has happened since October 7, that is equally important. But what is equally also important is who instigated Hamas to attack Israel. And the party that instigated Hamas, is it in its pragmatic interest now, given the kind of horrific implications that attack has brought to the Palestinians first and foremost, and the region of the Middle East, is it in their interest now to create a regional upheaval by attacking Iraq or Syria and then crossing the frontiers and Pakistani airspace and conducting a very irresponsible and hostile act in Pakistani territory? That is a serious question to ask.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtiaq, for joining us. And thank you very much, Saleem Saab, for being part of the discussion as well. Faisal, what we look at in terms of the kind of cooperation and support that Ambassador Saab was also pointing out that has been historically there with the US and Israel and still is, I want to understand whether or not the statement coming in with regards to a Palestinian statehood amounts to just lip service, while at the same time we don't have efforts towards end of ceasefire or the kind of support that perhaps other parts of the world expect in terms of the end of this genocide. Does that mean that what we've seen is just one sort of little bit of the story, and there's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes?
You know, Sana, when we talk about this kind of statement coming out from the White House, I should be expecting these sort of lip services starting on the very day when the bombing started by Israel being conducted on armless people of Gaza, and the way brutalized, I mean, that was to be said, brutalization of people of Gaza at that time, and I think they missed the chance at that time, and now they are talking about it. By the way, if we talk about the two-state solution, Pakistan highlighted this aspect of the solution since the very first day, and Pakistan has always said that Pakistan maintains that the only solution is 1967 two-state solution, and of course the Oslo Accord that needs to be mandated, and the places which are turned into settlements by Israel by force, by brute force, they need to be vacated and given back to people of Palestine, and that's how the two-state solution should be imposed on Israel, because when it comes to Palestine, all Palestine wants is freedom.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, we've of course seen that there are also proceedings going on in the International Court of Justice and at the ICC as well. And I want to know, of course, in terms of the way that perhaps all sort of engagements in the international community are influenced or affected by the political dynamics as well between different countries, whether or not countries like the US can actually influence this in a way which ends this genocide, or in terms of what they're stating for the Palestinian statehood to be allowed, will that have no impact on what goes on in the courts?
Right, Sana, thank you very much. Again, very good question, but the direction has to be in the opposite direction, right? I tell you why. This question, how unusual is this statement coming from a White House, or for that matter the US? I think that this is a stated policy of the Democrats. They have repeatedly been doing it. Obama was very clear, and that's why Netanyahu actually defied him by going there against his wishes and speaking to the joint session of Congress when Obama was president. Similarly, he was one of the champions of Trump as well. So there are two layers of influence of Israel. One, of course, that I keep on talking about, there's a documentary that everyone should watch. It is called Occupation of American Mind. And it's a beautiful documentary showing you that America wasn't always a huge fan of Israel, especially when it came to Arab-Israel war. At that time, public opinion was in favor of Arabs and Palestinians rather than Israel. And therefore, Israel actually created its propaganda ministry. They have a ministry called propaganda ministry, right? But apart from that, what has happened is that after Netanyahu came, because of war and terror, they have been actually building bridges with not American Jewry, but with American Christian evangelists. And by actually connecting that, they managed to get Donald Trump elected, who was in favor of one-state solution, right? Is Palestine should only contend with economy. They should be given money, like India tries to do with its minorities. Otherwise, they should have no voice. So right now, what is going to happen, Sana? And if you remember, Donald Trump actually wanted UN to be expelled from America, that its building must be sent somewhere else, right? Because he was also a property dealer and developer. But the problem now is that in coming days, Netanyahu will try his best to get Donald Trump or some Republican again back in power, so that they can have the kind of power to support Israel blindly. Otherwise, I think that in public they are supporting Israel, but Democrats are not huge fan of Netanyahu. Behind the scenes, they keep on supporting the calls for restraint.
All right. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us and being a part of the debate. That's all that we have from the show. We'll now see you Monday.